Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Genesis, the first chapter, as we now go all the way back to the very beginning, from the period of creation. As we went through, the time of Joshua, right, the conquest, to the era of the judges, we now go, to the time period preceding that, starting with the book of Genesis. So, obviously, contextually, at this point, it's literally the very beginning. So not really much going on except for the creation. So this is the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, in here, right, some key points to note is, number one, we know that originally the scriptures were in Hebrew, right? They weren't written in English. We now have English and, other language translations of these scriptures today. But with the translation comes also an introduction of, certain things that can be overlooked, right? If you're not studious enough to look into it. So one example here being in the Hebrew, right? It is bara ashiath, which is in the beginning or in the headings. Was it bara alahayim ath hashamayim wa ath ha'aratiza, which is to say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, when you go into the Hebrew for the word God over here, in English, it reads as singular, because people, when you see God, you think of singular, number one. And number two, a lot of people think when it says God here, it's referring to the Most High himself. Now, to a degree, it is, but in terms of the physicality of the creation here, this was actually done by Yahweh Shai and the angels, though the credit goes to the Most High. So when you go into the word God here in the Hebrew, you'll see it says Allah, Ha, Ya, Ma. The Ya and the Ma are joined at the end, making it Alahayim. So even here, even though they have the pronunciation off, you see they have Elohim, which is really Alahayim. The word Alahayim is plural, as you can see here, plural form of Allah. Now they have the Y in here, but it really should just be Allah. And Allah means God or power or a judge or a divine one. So Alahayim is the plural version of that. That's why when you look in here, you see it says plural, rulers, judges, divine ones, angels, gods. So when you see the term Alahayim, the context clues are important to help you understand what definition it's referring to when it uses the word God or Alahayim or even Allah. So with that being said, going back to the book of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, when it says in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, what it's saying here is in the beginning, the powers, right, or the gods, which as we just went through the definition, here would be Yahweh Shai and the angels that actually did the creation. So we know that in the very beginning you had the Most High, right? The one, before all, after all, no beginning, no end. He created Yahweh Shai, right? Which is why Yahweh Shai is the only begotten of the Father, because everything else comes of Yahweh Shai, right? But Yahweh Shai comes of the Most High. So he was created by the Heavenly Father. And from there, Yahweh Shai, by the guidance of the Heavenly Father, created everything else, being the angels, us, everybody. All right. So when you, we'll get a quick precept on that part before moving on. I believe this might be, is it Colossians? Am I spelling this right? 1. All right. Let's see. Yeah. So this is Colossians chapter 1, verse 13, dealing with Yahushai, the anointed. It says here, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness and hath translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. So who is his dear Son? The Messiah, Yahushai, in whom, right, in the Son, we have redemption through his blood. So through his sacrifice that he shed his blood for, we were redeemed back to the Father, even the forgiveness of sins. Who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. See, because he was the first spirit created. And you could just say it that way because, we know the Most High wasn't created, right? You don't even want to try to understand how that works. But anyway, he the firstborn of every creature, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible. So the things that you do see and the things that you don't see, i.e., the things of the spirit world, the things of this carnal world, the things that are conceptual but exist, right? Like you have like you don't see fear, but you can see manifestations of it, right? You don't see necessarily like certain concepts, but they exist. All those are still created. It says here, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. Okay. So when you go back to the book of Genesis chapter 1, the Most High creates Yahushai and guides Yahushai to create the rest via, instructions, or you might call it a blueprint, so to speak. And so as we go through the story of creation in Genesis chapter 1, that's what's going on. The Yahushai and the angels are following the direction or the blueprint given by the Heavenly Father to create everything the Heavenly Father wants. Verse 2, and the earth was without form and void. So in the very beginning, the earth that we see today it didn't look like it did, right? It was in its base form, you could say, right? Down to the form of, just like different elements, you could say even almost just scattered. So it wasn't formed together into this type of matter that we see today. It says here, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, right? Now the deep being pretty much space, right? And when you go into the word deep here, because we know there was darkness before there was light, but when you go into the word deep, as it says here, thawam, deep depths, deep places, abyss, sea, primeval, ocean, deep, depth, deep. Okay, so you pretty much had space, and you had the elements just all throughout. And so, as it says here, darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And this is the spirit of the angels. And when you go into the word moved over there, I believe in the Hebrew is rachab, which is to hover, which makes you think of like them traveling, or even in the chariot, could be. But as it says here, to hover. So they basically, as they started to begin the formation of the structure of the earth and all of those things, they, as it says, hovered upon the face of the waters, because as we'll read on down, in space is really water, okay? And you had at this point just elements, okay, all throughout. And so those elements needed to be put together or composed in, certain forms or certain ways by certain calculations to form different types of matter that we see today. It says here, and God, or the powers, said, and that's how I'll read it, because that's how it makes the most sense when you go by the original context of this chapter. So in the powers, this being Yahushua and the angels, said, let there be light, and there was light. And this was them basically commencing, right, to say, all right, let's begin the creation of light. and they created it. And once they were done, light existed. Now, you'll notice here that there wasn't mention of the sun or the moon or the stars, right? Which are um, the creations that were later on created to rule, right? When it comes to light, day, night, and so on. But the concept of light does not require a sun. All right, scientifically speaking, quote unquote, scientifically speaking, you can have light without the sun, right? When you have an atom, you have the nucleus, right, and then you have what's called the electron shell, and what that looks like is, let's see, electron shells is like rings, yeah, something like this, or maybe this is a good one. It's like rings um, around the nucleus, right? And what ends up happening, right? One way in which you can have light is when an atom like this basically becomes charged or like goes into an excited state, they call it. You have electrons that become supercharged and they can jump, right? They can jump to an outer ring or an outer shell. And eventually, when they release that energy, they come back to an inner shell. And that process, and when they, of which the electrons do that, when they release that energy, it's sometimes, depending on the element, in the form of photons, right? Which, based on the wavelength and the frequency of it, we see as light. So, in a nutshell, you could say when one way you can have light is when an electron that's excited goes from that outer shell back into the one of the inner rings or the inner shells. It releases, you could just say, light, to put it, in layman's terms. So let's type in here, electrons release light when, yeah, there we go. I think I should reword this in a better sense. So no, electrons do not emit light when excited, because when excited, as I explained before, is when they jump to the outer ring. Instead, they emit light when they return from an excited state to a lower, more stable energy state, or what they call ground state. Energy is absorbed during excitation. Okay, so it's that quote unquote relaxation where they emit that light. So I just explained that just to show that you can have light without, say like the sun and the moon. And this is all dealing with the manipulation of energy, right? Elements, atoms, photons, particles, molecules, X, Y, and Z. And so when you go back to Genesis 1 and 3, the the angels or the powers created light. All right. Now, as we're going to go into verse 4, it says, and the powers saw the light that it was good. So by whatever exact blueprint, they were showed in supercharging things or whatever the case is, or illuminating, elements to create this light. We don't know the details of that, but we know that they did it. And when they did it, as it says, they saw that it was good. Now, when they saw that it was good, what that means is it was according to the instructions they were given. Because in order to measure the success of something, there's usually a metric. When you have, if you were to bake a cake, for example, you would follow a formula, right? And a formula is different from a recipe, because with a recipe, you might have more leeway to switch it up here and there. But with a formula, you have to you have to follow it exactly, or else it's not going to come out how you expect. So if you're baking a cake, for example, you're following the formula. Now, when a cake comes out good, that good is another way of saying you were able to follow the formula exactly, right? Or to a very good degree. So the cake turned out the way it turned out. But if the cake doesn't turn out well, you're going to think, well, where did I go wrong, right? Which part did I mess up in terms of that process or that formula that you were supposed to follow? So the way that good was determined here was by whatever they created, whatever the powers created, how well was it in line with what they were instructed to do? And when they saw that, okay, this is exactly how, according to that blueprint, it was good. It was a successful part. And so they could move on to the next. It says here, and God, or the powers, divided the light from the darkness, meaning now you had, because in the beginning it was dark. And now after creating light, there was now a separation of darkness and light. It says, and the powers called the light day, and the darkness they called night. Now, once again, I'm going to use the proper pronouns. In the English, once again, they've translated it as he, but knowing the Hebrew, we know it makes more sense for this to be they, because this is plural. So in the darkness they called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So they did all this, the creation, of light and all of that, in the first day. Now, how exactly they divided this, once again, it's not told us in detail, right? Whether they had, a period of time within each day, not each 1,000-year period, but within each actual day, where, the elements would be illuminated, and then a period of time when they won't, to create that sort of cycle, who knows, right? But long story short, we know that at the end of the first day, light was created, and there was a concept or a separation between day and night. Now, just to stop here for a second, it mentions the evening and the morning were the first day. But it's important to know that these days, right, the 7 days of creation, or 6 days, and however you want to think about it, right? But that period of time, let's go with 7 days of creation. Each one of those days was a 1,000-year period. Okay, and we know that pursuing to what was mentioned here in the book of, I believe it's 2 Peter, is it 3 and 8? Yeah. So this is 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, right? So don't be without knowledge of this. And what is that thing? That one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So one day for the Lord is the equivalent of 1,000 years for us, or for man. Okay, and likewise, 1,000 years for man is the equivalent of one day for the Lord. And so when you go back to Genesis, remember that it's not man that is creating, it's the Lord, right? It's the angels, it's the powers that are doing this creation. So if it took the powers a day, that time period, the equivalent of that for man would have been 1,000 years. And it kind of makes sense, because all the things that, creation is vast, right? So it does make sense that it would take, a good period of time to actually complete all of these things that we see today, which even today we see really just a fraction of the Lord's actual creation, right? So as it says here, the evening and the morning were the first day, i.e. the first 1,000-year period. And the powers said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. So going back a couple of verses above, we read how the angels moved, or the powers moved upon the face of the deep, which is space, right? And now you have light, you have darkness, you have day, you have night. The next thing they created was the firmament. And when you go into the firmament, it's pretty much the atmosphere, right, that we have, today. And you can kind of think of it almost like a giant bubble around the earth, right? It's kind of already a part of the earth, but the word here for it is rakwayai, which is, as it says, extended surface. And we'll come back to this definition in a bit, but I do want to pull up here atmosphere. So even just what is the atmosphere? So it says the atmosphere is the layer of gases surrounding a planet or other celestial body, held in place by its gravity. On Earth, this mixture of gases is commonly known as air, and acts as a protective bubble that makes life possible. So the earth being encompassed within the atmosphere allows us to have, like the oxygen and the breathable air and all of those things that we have here on the earth. And so the atmosphere acts as this like in between of the earth and space. And that's why I mentioned here that it was created to separate, it was created in the midst of the waters, right? To divide the waters from the waters. So the waters outside in space are now kept out or divided from the waters that were within, right? Imagine if you just like we read before, you had everything in water, right? And so now with this like atmospherical bubble, you could say you've now created a separate chunk within it, which still has water, but you also have water on the outside. And a quick precept for this as well is here in the book of Psalms 148. It says, "Praise him, ye heavens of heavens, and ye waters that be above the heavens." Okay, so it's going to show you really when you go all the way up there, which is why I said I would come back to this definition of firmament, because when you go all the way up there, it's really going up into water. So when you go into the definition of firmament, which is Rakoyai, it says extended surface, solid, expanse, firmament, firmament of vault of heaven supporting waters above, considered by Hebrews as solid and supporting, quote, waters above. Okay, because as we even just read in Psalms, we knew and understood like what it is exactly that was up there. And that's why even when you go into the time of the flood, it mentions the windows of heaven were opened. Okay. So I'll read verse 7 again. "And the powers made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And the powers called the firmament heaven." Now, when you go into the word here in the Hebrew is shamayim, right? Which means pertaining to the waters or of the waters, because that's the sha pertaining to, and mayam is waters, all right, plural. And so here they have it as heaven, heavens, sky, atmosphere, so on and so forth. So that's the reason why they called it heaven or pertaining to the waters, because it was that divider of the waters outside or the waters above, and then the earth and what was sort of under the firmament. "And the evening and the morning were the second day." So they created all that within the second day. "And the powers said," and every time you see this, it's basically like a day's end. So the next verse is the beginning of the next day. So now within the third day, the beginning of the third day, the powers said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together onto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. So now they started to make and they started to form the earth even more, right? By putting the elements, composing them together to form different types of matter. So now you had liquid, right? The seas, as is going to go into. And then you had the land, which they created. And then you had the firmament, the gas, right? So you had different states of matter that had formed to make the earth. And you can think of this as like the foundations of the earth that were being put together here. And so they had the dry land appear. It was created, and it was so. "And the powers called the dry land earth," which in the Hebrew is aratiza. "And the gathering together of the waters called they seas." Now you notice it didn't say lands, it said land, singular, because in the very beginning, that whole concept of Pangea is, it's true in the sense that, let's look up here, Pangea. Yeah, in the sense that all of these lands that are now separated were at one point one big landmass. And that's why when you look at them, even looking at South America and Africa, they look like puzzle pieces that fit together. Okay. So in the very beginning, they were placed together. They were locked in, into one. That was the land that was caused or made to appear. And then it was after the flood that it was broken up, and separated. So now you have the seas, you have the land, and the powers saw that it was good. And the powers said, let the earth bring forth grass. So now the land, Arataza, they basically caused vegetation to now grow. The herb yielding seed, so plants, right, which they, plants and trees, they bear fruit and they have their seed as it's going to go into, which is within them. And you can plant those seeds to create more of those plants. It says the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. So you have different fruits, right, after their kind. You have apples, oranges, watermelons, X, Y, and Z. These are all different types whose seed is in itself. That's why when you eat a watermelon, it has seeds inside of it. Upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit. That's why you have so many different kinds of herbs, so many different kinds of trees, so many different kinds of fruits, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And the powers saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And the powers said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven. So that firmament, that atmosphere they had created, they now said, let's put lights in here. So what this was going to do was, this was now going to be the institution of a cycle, okay, for the lights. Because they had already created light, but now they were creating a process, right, to where you would have the sun and the moon, which, as we're going to read, would rule over. So they would now be like the actual, they would be in the office of providing light. And the power said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night. See? And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So now they said, all right, next we got to create these lights, put them in the atmosphere, and have those be the dictators of day and night. And this was like the new system, you could say. And let them be for signs, right? Hence, when you have signs in the heavens, like you have like constellations, you have eclipses, solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, blood moons. These are all signs that are possible because you have these lights that are in the heavens or in the heaven. And for seasons and for days and for years. So for telling time, which you have the moon that tells, time on a, let's say a greater level, right? You use the moon to calculate days, months, right? Even years. And then you have the sun, which you can use to calculate time on a more granular level. Hence you have sundials. And so the sun can tell you like times in terms of maybe hours or even minutes. And that's what we just read here. Verse 15. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. So what they tell you in school, which is that the sun, right? If you look here, let me see, space and planets. Yeah, this is what they try to show you. That's the sun. And then you have, what is that? That might be the earth. You got different planets and they're all, what's that? Heliocentric. They're all rotating around the sun. And so that's not true. Okay. We're reading here that the sun, which we're about to read, which is one of the lights that was made, was put in the firmament of the earth to give light upon the earth. Okay. So the sun is within the earth's atmosphere. That's why when you look up, you see it in the sky over there. And that's why when it's hot in the summertime, it's hot. Okay. And the powers made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, which is the sun. And that's why when the sun is up, it's daytime. And the lesser light to rule the night, which is the moon. They made the stars also. And the powers set them in the firmament of the heaven. So once they created the sun and the moon, which would take over dictating day and night, they placed these in the actual firmament, not outside in the deep or outside in space, but in the earth's firmament or atmosphere, to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from darkness. So see, they had done this before, but the light from the sun is different, right? The light from the sun isn't the same as what I described before, right? With the electrons jumping back and forth. It may have some similar concepts, but I think the sun's energy is slightly different. Long story short, the powers had already divided day and night, but now the sun and the moon would be the official dictators of that. That's why they created them. And the powers saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And the powers said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life. So they first formed the earth, made it habitable, created vegetation and so on and so forth, created the sun, created the moon, created the lights, and then created the actual creatures that would rely upon those things. So if you look at the order in which these things are created, it's done in a sensible manner, right? So on the fifth day, as it says, because we just finished the fourth day, the power said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life. This is all life, from sea creatures to land creatures, because everything comes from water, right? Babies are formed in water. That's why they talk about the water breaking, right? Even if an animal lays an egg, when that baby hatches from the egg, it's you don't see any newborn that's dry, as just straight dry. No, they all come from some form of liquid, whether they come out of an elephant or a human or a zebra, or even an egg. It's always liquid inside, because that water brings forth life. Okay, so it says, and fowl that they may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. So in the waters is where everything, those, whatever was happening in there, the combination of cells and whatever the case was, that's where life came from. And the powers created great whales, which these great whales are going into more than just your great sperm whales and orcas and so on. It's actually going into like Leviathan kind of sea creatures, big giant sea monsters and all that. They were also created, right? Which is Thanayan. So as it says here, dragon, serpent, sea monster, dinosaur, dragon, which the Lord did create those as well, right? So dinosaurs and all that, yeah, they exist now. Where they are right now, we don't know. But the Lord did create them along with your Leviathans. And everything was created in pairs, okay? So even those giant sea serpents in there are families, you could say, right, that were created. Now, we don't see Leviathan because the Lord has him in probably the deepest parts of the depths of the ocean, because if he was to come out, I'm pretty sure we all know how devastating that would be. But we know he exists, and it's even spoken of in the book of Job. And every living creature, you see that? Every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. So the whole concept of a common ancestor that we all evolved from is false. Everything came from the waters, different kinds of creatures, from humans to different kinds of animals. They all came from the waters. And every winged fowl after his kind, and the powers saw that it was good. And the powers blessed them, saying, so it's kind of like today, Esau Edom tries to do that, right? They'll take, they'll have like the sperm and the egg, mix and fertilize, and then they'll take that and put it inside an artificial womb or some like contraption, to have it grow in that, and then they'll later place it back inside of a surrogate or some other body to actually birth the baby, right? But that's all. How is it that they're able to create an artificial space where that life can still form? Do they put that in just the air? No, they put it in water, right? With different, chemicals and so on and so forth to help sustain it and to help further that growth. So the same thing was happening in the actual waters. Details of that, we don't know. So as it says here, verse 22, and the powers blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. So the first creation was in the waters, and they came out of the waters. After that, the powers instituted the act of reproduction to preserve that life and to keep it, reproducing and to keep populating. So the act of, sex and just reproduction came after that first, initial creation, because you had to start somewhere. So be fruitful and multiply, which is why animals mate and so on, and then they have offspring, and then they keep on going. And fill the waters in the seas, so your your sea creatures, and let the fowl multiply on the earth, right? Your birds, and it goes, past that even to just animals in general. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. So these life creatures, living creatures, both in the water and on the earth, were created in the fifth day. That includes man. And the power said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, the beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. So at this point, after creating the actual life forms, they instituted these laws of nature and also the variety of creatures that you see. Okay, that's why when it mentions the earth bringing forth the living creature after his kind, cattle, you have different kinds of cattle, right? You have bulls, you have cows, you have, different variations, different families of them, and creeping things, right? Different, reptiles and all of those. And the beasts of the earth after his kind, and it was so. So now you had a variety of these different animals on the earth. And the powers made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after his kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. When it says they made them, it means they fashioned them, right? It doesn't mean that they now created them, because we know they were created from the waters that we read up above. And everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and the powers saw that it was good. So now you had variety, right? You have centipedes, millipedes, friggin' beetles and praying mantis. Then you have, geckos, and then you have Komodo dragons. Like, you have different varieties, some of the same family or same stock, but they're still separated after their kind. And the powers said, let us make man in our image. So now you see why it makes sense that I kept using the plural sense, because these were the angels and Yahushua, not just the Most High himself. So let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them, right? So it's not just Adam, one man, but a group, as we're going to go into. Let them, the man, or the people that we're going to create, or that we have created, have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So when you go into that word, like make, it's to fashion, right? Or to ordain. All right, let me put it that way. So here, and as we read even into the second chapter, there was a difference, right? Man was created, but in the beginning, we were all in like a primitive state. But it tells you, I believe in the Apocrypha, how the Lord gave man a higher level of intelligence over these animals. That's why they had dominion over them. So we had reasoning and speech and the understanding of the cogitations of the mind, and so on and so forth. Now, on a base level, all mankind had that, right? The ability to like speak and so on and so forth, which made us, of a higher level. But in the process of this, as we'll go into in the second chapter as well, the Lord made a distinction even in that, right? In giving or separating further the sons of God, or those that would become the sons of God, by giving them the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, okay, of righteousness, right, of the Lord. So on a whole, the Lord raised the intelligence of man above that of every other creature. But even amongst man, there was a separation the powers made with those that would be the chosen line. Let's put it that way. So the powers created man in his own image, or in their own image. In the image of God created they him. Male and female created they them. So this is what goes to show you that at this point, man was not one person, but a collection or a group of people or community or society that were made at this time. Okay, and they were created in the image of the powers, meaning that one, they were in humanoid form, but they had a higher level of intelligence than just your average primitive, creature or animal. Okay, and then the to be more specific, you had those that were of the sons of God that were made differently, and I believe in the book of Ezekiel it talks about that as well. Verse 28, and the powers blessed them and the powers said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, once again instituting the law on, or the natural order of reproduction. So after they were created, after they came out the waters, then the act of reproduction was instituted in order to preserve and to continue that life. And replenish the earth and subdue it, to basically have dominion over it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And the powers said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, so every plant and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, i.e. trees that bear fruit, to you it shall be for meat. So this, as was like a institution for both man and animals. And you'll see here that man and animals were all herbivores in the past. We weren't carnivores. Even the animals weren't carnivores. But this was basically like instituting it to where by nature, by innate behavior, we knew, what was edible and what wasn't. Verse 30, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. So basically, any edible, plants and crops, we could eat, and we knew to do so, right, and not to eat each other or not to eat the animals. So this was almost like a part of that law of nature that was also instituted or implemented on the earth. And the powers saw everything that they had made, and behold, it was very good. So it was according to the instruction or the blueprint the Heavenly Father gave them. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. And that brings us to the end of the book of Genesis, chapter 1. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha, Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.